Well, unfortunately, the Hoosiers did not make the NCAA tournament this year, but still going to take a look at the players, the roster, break them down a little bit, see who did what. Some guys exceeded expectations. Some guys probably didn't quite live up to expectations, and it's up to Jack Ankony to let everybody know who those guys are. We're going to start with Trey Galloway and Jack. Kind of a glue guy, did a ton of different things for Indiana this year. But I guess what were the thoughts about him before the season started, and like just what was the hype surrounding him before the season tipped off?
Yeah, so a little bit of uncertainty with him going into the year because he had that offseason knee surgery after I think it was a meniscus injury that he had like in March of last year. So sort of went into the year, kind of took a back seat. I mean, going into his junior year, he was, kind of heralded as, he's going to be in the starting lineup, going to have a bigger role. But then, Indiana brought in guys like Miles Rice and Kanan Carlisle to kind of um, take some pressure off of him because I do think his junior year he was having to do a lot of do kind of had too much on his shoulders, I think, and maybe Mike Woodson thought going into this year it'd be better for him to sort of be in more of a complementary role. Um, so I think there was some uncertainty going in, especially like with him as a 3-point shooter because he's been so up and down in that throughout his career. But it was going to be his fifth year senior season. He announced on senior day last year. Instead of giving his goodbye speech, he said, we're going to run it back. And so, fan favorite going into the year, and guy that had been with Woodson his whole time, and even the last season of Archie Miller.
So he switched up the hair. He did a couple things out on the court to try to give himself a different look. I know that was like a kind of like a funny topic of discussion about how he played pre-haircut and post-haircut,
Yeah.
which is, I mean, fans will latch on to anything. But how did he end up doing? I mean, fifth year senior guy, like I said, important for a lot of different reasons. How do you feel like he did this season?
Yeah, I think at the start of the season, it kind of got off to a little bit of a slow start, which was probably expected because, like we mentioned, with the injury, um, kind of in November, December, even into January, maybe a little bit more issues than his past career with turnovers, and his field goal percentage dropped to 42%, which was the worst since his freshman year. He took kind of a lot of the heat, I think, from fans. You think back to that Illinois game, and the student section was kind of booing him, and there was just a lot of negativity kind of put on his shoulders. But I think he really finished the season strong and kind of became the go-to kind of facilitator for Indiana. Over the last 6 games, he averaged 14.3 points and 7.3 assists. Um, that was kind of after Mike Woodson decided to bring Miles Rice off the bench. So he kind of put everything in Galloway's hands, which was good from the perspective, I think, of Indiana's offense in terms of like the pick and roll was really difficult to stop at times with him and Balo or Renew. But Galloway's not the best shooter, and they were kind of put in the position towards the end of the year where he was taking 14, 15 shots a game. And I just don't know if Indiana is at its best with him in that type of role in terms of taking that many shots. I think he's a great facilitator and things like that, but that's just kind of what happened because guys like Mackenzie and Baca were tough to rely on. You think of that Big Ten tournament game, Oregon really locked up Luke Goody. And then, like I mentioned, Rice and Carlisle never really panned out as much as we thought. So, um, I mentioned earlier he's had kind of the crazy career as a 3-point shooter. He shot like 46% his sophomore year, and then it dropped to like 26% last year, back up to 32 this year. So I think it turned out to be a good season. Maybe not as the best case scenario that people imagined, but I think he really came on at the end of the year and ended up having a pretty solid season. It just kind of turns out that it ended up being like last year, where if you're putting too much on Trey Galloway, it might not be lead to the greatest team success. And I don't even really mean that as a slight to Trey. I almost kind of view that as like uh, a statement of how the rest of the roster went.
And finally, if you were giving him a grade for his final season at IU, what would that be?
Yeah, I think just a flat B is fair. I think in order for him to get an A in this, he would have had to be a little bit more consistent and for, maybe the shooting numbers to be up a little bit more. But he was always a guy that you knew was going to play hard. He was good on both ends of the floor, not like a defensive liability or an offensive liability in either way. Woodson clearly trusted him because he knew the offense and everything. And obviously didn't end how he wanted with Indiana missing out on the tournament. But I think fans will remember Trey Galloway pretty fondly overall.